Good afternoon. Hey, today I've got something I want to share. It's on the surface, it's really trivial, and I hope by the end of the video that it's not super trivial, because for me it opened up some ideas that were quite lovely. This idea, that all things come from the beloved, all things are the beloved, and so really that possibility of seeing the beloved in all things should be a reality, should be part of our daily experience. But how do we get there? How do we do that? uh, there's a couple of little scriptures here that were sort of teasing me into this kind of thinking that I want to share with you. I'm reading again that book, Spiritual Talks, and Swami Turiyananda is talking here about lust. And he says something very interesting. He says, lust is blind, but love is pure and resplendent. It is lust if you have the idea of man, and love if you have the idea of God in your beloved. So it's not the act, it's not the particulars of the things that are, of the worldly nature or of God nature. Everything is of God nature, but it depends on your understanding and your knowledge as you look at that thing. That he's saying, if you see a person as a body, as an object, which we're all very familiar with, then it's lust. But if you see your person as the ideal, if you're actually looking through them as a window toward their highest self, toward the part of them that you love, that you adore, that is beautiful to you, then that is worship. That is wonderful and alive and pure to see God in that thing. And that notion that the highest realization is not necessarily the oneness of everything, it's seeing God in all things, seeing love represented in all things. Sri Ramakrishna would say that every now and then. And I love that idea. And then there's this little verse here. It says, see if I can find it for just a moment. I lost my page. Here we go. He said, it is almost useless to read Vedanta unless one compares notes with one's own experience. That somehow this idea of oneness, this idea of God in all things, has to become real, has to become part of our experience. We can't just read it and believe it. Of what value is a belief? Beliefs change from one minute to the next, one experience to the next. They're all dependent on things of the mind, which are always shifting and changing and realigning in their relationships with each other. So how do we go about doing this? And this is where I bring in my trivial example of this thing that I learned just yesterday. I want you to look at this keyboard for a minute. Not the keyboard as a whole, actually. We're going to focus on one particular key on this keyboard. It's a Macintosh keyboard, so this little symbol doesn't exist on any of the other ones. And it's a symbol that I've known since 1983 when I had my first Mac Plus, but never really wondered about it, never knew anything about it. So it was a meaningless symbol that sort of just meant the key you press to get something, in combination with something else. And yet, yesterday, after 55 years of life, I have come to a deeper understanding of this symbol. This little symbol right here was developed by Susan Kerr in 1982. She was looking for a symbol for the Alt key or for the Command key on the board. What kind of icon should that be? She had been an artist and she was able to represent, a lot of information in a very small thing. And she was trying to think of a symbol that would reference something else. So this is a key you press in combination with something else that will get you somewhere else. So she was wondering what it was, and she became familiar with, she was, I guess, on a trip in Sweden. I know you have to find out how she found out about it, but she was on a trip in Sweden and she saw this symbol on a road sign. And it meant that there was a point of interest or something interesting to go see. And she became curious about, where did that come from? Where did that squiggly little square with rounded corners, circles on the corners come from? And how does it mean that there's something of interest in here, that this is an access to something of more interest? And so she researched it and found out that there was a 12th century Swedish castle that if you photographed it from above, it had this shape. And so the Swedes had taken that shape as a symbol for meaning if you go this direction or take this exit, there's something very interesting to be seen here, or this is an access to something else that you might want or need or be curious about. And so what, you say? How is that spiritual? What was spiritual for me, and what I think is really interesting about the way I perceive life, is that you have this key here that meant nothing to me. It was one-dimensional. I just saw it. I saw the shape. I never asked about it, never wondered about it, never cared about it. And to find out that there is such a story behind this that actually points to a 12th century castle in Sweden, which in itself suggests all kinds of stories and histories and interesting points about it, was behind the design on a keyboard that I've been using for nigh 30, 40 years now, that has this profound story and meaning to it. And I love the fact now that whenever I see this symbol on the keyboard, I'm reminded of something much richer and much fuller and much better. And that is the spiritual ideal that I want to talk about today. That's the one I want to point at today. You know, Ramakrishna tells this story about how one time he was in the big Central Park of Calcutta, and there was this English boy leaning against a tree who had his leg crossed over the other leg as he was standing there. And he was bent in 3 places, as Ramakrishna said. And it reminded him of the famous pictures of Sri Krishna, the Lord Krishna, who's playing his flute with his legs crossed and kind of bending at the hip off to the side. And just seeing that alone put Ramakrishna into ecstasy. You see, if I looked at that kid, I would have none of those references. I would have thought nothing. It would have just been flat, and it wouldn't even have been a mentionable experience in my day. Whereas Ramakrishna, seeing the exact same thing, goes into ecstasy of the beloved. He merges with the divine mother, because of that exact symbol. And then he jokingly tells a story about a man that he knew who was so much in love with God that one time he saw a man with a walking stick that was made from the same kind of wood that he imagined Sri Krishna's flute to have been made from. And that guy goes into this ecstasy of unity with God because of that simple experience. And once again, the type of wood of an old man's cane, taking the mind to the feet of the beloved to the point of an ecstatic experience of God, experience of the divine. That's amazing to me. That's wonderful to me. And it made me think, gosh, today, how many things did I see today where I didn't know the story, where I didn't understand the connections, and my mind was not able to get to God, was not able to get to my highest ideal, my highest ideal of love, my highest ideal of existence and intelligence and being, just this amazing experience of life that I know nothing about, frankly. But excites me and fills me with such a wonder, even after 55 years, to be fresh and new and to see that, wow, I am so ignorant. And this ignorance prevents me from enjoying the delight of being, the delight of God, the delight of wonder. So now whenever you see this squiggly little key on a Macintosh keyboard, you're going to think of God. Why? Because there's a story behind it about a 12th century castle in Sweden that tells a story way beyond a 2-dimensional picture on a flat keyboard belonging to a computer. And in the same way, anything that you look at with knowledge will put the mind of God within you, will put the experience of the beloved within you, and will point all of the fingers toward that delight of the soul, that delight of being, that one thing that gives everything meaning. Love itself, love in its purest, highest, most beautiful ideal.